Now, the health department, the big spender as far as the government budget is concerned, has a number of things happening to it at the moment. There are 2 financial reviews happening, looking at its finances. There's also something that's been going on for some time now. We're into the 8th segment, if I can put it that way, of the West Midlands Quality Review Service. It's the final one. I'm talking to the Health Minister, who's with me live in the studio, David Ashford. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
John.
But before I do that, can I just mention what we heard earlier this morning about this binge drinking, 55s and retirement? First of all, does the department, when it hears something like this, immediately look into this and think, is there something we should be looking into?
Well, actually, this is something that's identified within the substance misuse strategy that we published and is being laid before Tynwald today, where we've identified that younger people seem to be drinking less, but older people of my generation and above seem to actually be drinking more.
Do we know why?
As far as I'm aware, I haven't seen any evidence as to why that is, but I think it's, in many cases, personally, I'd say it's probably a cultural thing.
Let's look at this review of clinical governance, the 8th one. This is the first one to thump down on your desk. It started, 2014? Was it 2014?
2013.
2013. Looking at this, and I've got the 2014 version here, there's an enormous amount of scholarship and investigation into this. What did it reveal for the island? How many lines of investigation was there actually up there for us to look into?
Well, in terms of learning points from all the reviews combined, the department estimates there'll be about 700 different things to be looking at if we were to look into every individual thing identified across the reports.
Some of these are very small, presumably.
They are indeed, but I think one of the important things is that the West Midlands Review Service has provided a real independent look at how we operate our health service. They've been a critical friend to the department, and I think that's very, very important. And I'm very keen that once the 8th review is completed, that we take a holistic look across all the reviews and have an implementation plan in place.
Have we not done that already?
Well, it's very hard to do, John, because with the different reviews, although they're looking into different areas, some of the things that they're actually identifying cross specialities. So one of the things that I want to make sure we do is that we don't look at things in silos, we look at things overall, and that can only be achieved once we have the final review.
Is there anything, I mean, you were familiar with this before you came into this,
I was
this
indeed.
job. Is there anything that you looked at, or it's more than one thing that you looked at and thought, oh my goodness, that's something that needs to be done straight away?
Well, one of the things is one that was subject of a question to me in the House of Keys by my predecessor, Mrs. Beecroft, last week around governance. Obviously, the report, the 7th report that we've just had, identified governance issues just as they did in 2014, and most of those seem to boil down to communication. I said to Roger Watterson when I appeared on Sunday Opinion the other day, for me, communication is absolutely key in the department, and that is something I'm very keen to improve.
By governance, you mean the way the machine works?
There was a various different bits of governance identified as concerns. A lot of it, like I say, seemed to boil down to people not telling other people
Silo
what
mentality
was going on. To a certain extent, yes, and that is something I'm very keen to eradicate.
Looking at the membership of the visiting team for 2014, goodness me, it's impressive, and there's some high rankers in there. How much does this all cost?
Well, that is subject to a Tynwald question today, so although I know the figure, I'm not going to obviously reveal it on air now, because that would be very discourteous to my colleagues, particularly Mr. Speaker, who's placed the question today. But the one thing I will say as a bit of a teaser is when the answer is published later on today, it's not as high as I think a lot of people will, and probably yourself, will assume.
It's value for money.
I think it most definitely is value for money, and I think we've been very lucky to have the West Midlands Quality Review Service in. Like I say, they've been a critical friend, and I think some of the things that they've identified will help us move them forward.
And these 8 segments, is the job done, is it?
It is the job done once the 8 segments are complete, and like I say, then what we need to do is combine up what's been identified in all 8 reports and look at a proper implementation plan and how we can progress the findings.
Just speaking of value for money, you spoke last week, I think, of St Andrew's House, which is being vacated. It was leased by the government. Getting everybody out of there and into government offices will save us over £300,000.
304,000 to be precise in rental costs. Obviously, the adult social care division, which is currently in Markwell House, will move up to Murray House, and that will allow GTS, which is partially already occupying floors in Markwell House, to move the rest of their remit.
We own Markwell House, no?
Yes.
The government owns it. Are there any other buildings, major buildings which we lease, which you have your eyes set on?
Well, in terms of government is constantly looking at the buildings.
But there are still quite a few, are there?
There's quite a government, obviously, just by its sheer size, has quite a lot of offices occupied. But one thing I would say, I know from my time in the Cabinet Office, that government is constantly looking at the properties that we occupy and the best ways to use them and any synergies that we can find.
No questions for you and oral answers today, I see.
There is the written question, of course,
about
question,
but
West
not in
Midlands
the
quality
oral
review. No, I think everyone obviously had enough of me last week in House of Keys.
But you do later on in the agenda, obviously, have that report into the financial side of the health service.
There's several items on the agenda, so it's certainly not going to be a quiet day for me, John.